Hi there, and welcome to the latest in a series of podcasts for the OGV Media Group Let's Talk Transition series. I'm Murray Melhuish, founder and principal consultant at Annett Consulting. We help organisations bring offshore technologies and services to market and provide interim project management to the offshore wind industry. With me today is Alex Meredith, Project Director of the Berwick Bank Offshore Wind Project. Hey Alex, thanks for joining us.
No problem at all.
Can you introduce yourself, Alex, and your, along with your organisation and your project, please?
Yeah, very happy to. So it's Alex Meredith. I'm the Project Director for Berwick Bank, as you said. I am leading a team of brilliant people who are trying to bring to life Berwick Bank Wind Farm, which is a 4.1 gigawatt site in the outer Firth of Forth. We all work for OGV Renewables, who's the lead developer, and we're marching towards a consent application for Berwick Bank later on this year, moving as quickly as we can to deliver what we think is going to be a fantastic project.
Great. Can you give us an insight into how long that consenting process is expected to take?
Well, we are starting, as I say, by putting the application in later this year, and it's a Scottish government process, so it's Section 36, and the target timeline for consenting, or at least making a decision, is 9 months. But our project is a little bit special, I suppose, in good ways and some ways which are more challenging. So we expect it'll take a little bit longer than that, but we'd like to see a consent determined within a year. That means by the end of 2023. That allows us then to move forward with the project in 2024. And our grid connection date, which is kind of the big looming target on the horizon, is in 2026. So we want to see turbines into the water and connection made by then.
Great. And how long has it taken to reach this point, Alex?
Well, it's a long process. In particularly in this case, the Berwick Bank site was first awarded to SSE in 2010. So the Crown Estate back then, and it wasn't even the Crown Estate Scotland in those days, did a tender round of leasing, which has become more familiar now, but in those days was a very unusual process, let's say. That was round 3, and then at that time they wanted to issue quite large zones to developers because offshore wind was a little bit of a challenging technology. It wasn't sure how well or how fully projects would be delivered. And it's taken a little bit of time for this zone, which is the Firth of Forth zone, which was awarded to SSE and a partner at the time in 2010, to come through and be developed fully. So SSE focused on the northern section of the site, which is now known as Seagreen. And you may have seen last couple of weeks or recently, there's been an announcement of first power for Seagreen. So that was a real step forward. That's the first power coming out of that Firth of Forth zone, which was awarded in 2010. So there you go. That's 12 years from leasing to first power. But we're in the same zone, but we think we can accelerate a bit on that timetable. Seagreen has moved quickly since it got through consent, but we want to move the consent process quickly and then get through to delivery of the project just in the next few years.
Great. And how long have you been with the project, Alex?
So 18 months. I joined the project last year, early last year, just as we were starting to get through the COVID, the height of the COVID pandemic, and a really interesting time to join the project. Fantastic team already built up, but had been working fully remotely and working on the development work with all the COVID protocols and people surveying in a very careful manner. And we've been able to, I think, take advantage of some of the relaxation of restrictions and start to get together a bit more and see that development work really step up a pace, which has been great.
And just to give us an idea of scale, 4.1 gigawatts. Can you translate that into value for Britain, pound value, local value add?
Yeah, I mean the numbers are all very large. So this project is by far the largest development project in the UK for offshore wind. So a real step up in scale. In terms of what it can deliver, firstly, enough electricity to power 5 million homes potentially. So, a huge amount of electricity for consumers, but, but generally for GB and for Scotland to decarbonise, that's the kind of capacity that we need from our wind project. So, real step up there. And then in terms of economic value, we think there's going to be a spend of something close to 9 billion in the UK. Half of that almost in Scotland. So, upwards of £4 billion to be spent in Scotland as we go through this process across the lifetime of the project. And, in terms of what that means for jobs, again, we're targeting 10,000 jobs in the UK to be supported by this project, with half of those again in Scotland. So 5,000 jobs in Scotland, potentially at the height of construction. And that's a really significant contribution. And of course, when you add up several projects that are potentially in the pipeline, you may start to see numbers like that being sort of talked about. But what the advantage of Berwick Bank is that we can move forward one project that has that great bang for the buck of being able to say to the market, let's invest in the supply chain, build the facilities that allow those kind of jobs and investment to be realised. So, it's a really exciting project, a one hit to be able to say, let's get that investment into Scotland and get those jobs created and that value created.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, it's a significant project for sure. What can you tell us about the supply chain that's going to deliver this?
Well, it's a great challenge for the supply chain, because one of the great things about the offshore wind industry at the moment is it's growing fast, and not just in the UK, but globally too. So the major contractors who have been working on offshore wind in the UK are now looking abroad and are busy with projects, whether it's in Asia or in the US or even Asia Pacific. There's quite a lot going on around the world. So our project comes along at a time when, honestly speaking, there's a challenge to be able to get the kind of components that we need to build this project. So that's another good reason why we want to support investment in the UK to deliver the components that we need, and in Scotland particularly. And knowing that there are ScotWind projects and further development to do behind us, we are hoping and we're working with the supply chain to ensure that investment does get made, and that we can see investments and then delivery from bases in the UK. But realistically, there are some parts of our site which will be manufactured abroad, and partly that's because the technology is being made by companies that are based abroad, but also because the scale of what we're trying to do is simply too large in some cases for UK ports and infrastructure to cope with in terms of fabrication. So we have to take advantage of the real large-scale facilities that are abroad to be able to deliver the scale that we need for Berwick Bank. But there's no doubt that as we see the construction process going forward, fabrication as well, there's opportunities not just for the big manufacturing facilities to be located in Scotland and the UK, but also for the tier 2, tier 3, the support supply chain to also start really growing and seeing momentum built, and they can expand. And plenty of people that we've been speaking to in Scotland are looking for that certainty of new projects to be able to diversify something that maybe they're doing in oil and gas or in another sector into offshore wind. But at the moment, they're a little bit cautious about doing so. I mean, clearly, economic climate is challenging anyway, but without projects that are fully consented and certainly going ahead, manufacturers who are currently looking at different industries might struggle to make investments that can support offshore wind. So again, the certainty of getting a consent for Berwick Bank, taking it through to the next stage quickly, allows us to offer those manufacturers the certainty that means they can invest, create those jobs, and ensure that the economic benefit of a project like this stays as much as possible in Scotland.
Great. And can you give us a flavour for the type and number of turbines and foundations, just to give us an idea?
Well, we're looking to consent up to 307 turbines, and that's that's a big scale. That's a large number for an offshore site, and yeah, I mean the scale, they're large scale machines. We expect the foundations, the foundation type is what's known as a jacket foundation. So it's a kind of lattice tripod, almost certainly a tripod, which is, they become a little bit famous around, I think, certainly in the Firth of Forth area in Scotland, because Seagreen have been using a very similar design, and those foundations get shipped in, and they kind of find their way up the Forth, and they almost look a slightly space age kind of infrastructure sitting on the ports around the Firth of Forth, and also up at Nig, where they've been doing some of the marshalling work. So people who've seen those will be familiar with what I mean. But they're large scale. They're large steel constructions painted yellow, they create a structure when it's in the water, which would be from at least from the seabed level to the tip, similar scale to the Eiffel Tower. Really large scale structures, and clearly a definite again step up in scale for us compared to some of the projects that people will be familiar with. Certainly turbines onshore are not at the same sort of scale.
And Alex, who are the tier one suppliers for the project?
Well, we haven't completed our procurement work yet. In fact, we're still at a reasonably early stage in terms of engagement of the tier one suppliers, and we'd anticipate though that the main suppliers will be suppliers who've got a strong track record in delivery of these kind of projects, and that's an interesting challenge, because we always want to see good competition in the market, but equally we also have to see partners who we can rely on and we know have done this work before. Particularly working in the offshore environment, that does limit some of our options, because clearly we need vessels, and capable vessels as well. And one of the big challenges we've got is that as our turbines and our foundations and our overall components scale up, the vessels that are available to transport some of these things into the field and to install them, the number of those is not keeping pace. So we want to see greater scale vessels, and so we have to work with suppliers who are able to either offer those kind of scale vessels or have ways of manufacturing them in time for our delivery.
Great. And are there opportunities for suppliers that want to add value to Berwick Bank? How do they get involved? How do they get in touch?
Yeah, so we've got a website, berwickbank.com, which has a link through a very straightforward email to be able to give us a shout that people are interested in being part of the supply chain. I mean, at the moment, the work that we're doing on development also has opportunities for small businesses, particularly in Scotland. I mean, an example that we had recently was I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting in I think it was Eastern Midlothian, and we had someone there who we were talking to about animations and work that they do in the animation space. And of course, in some of the development work we do, we like to visualize what we're doing, and we were able to work with them to create a video and an animation that gave more detail about some of our development work. And so there are opportunities for this different businesses that perhaps you wouldn't expect to be associated with offshore wind to come in and work with us right now. So, if people have ideas about how you could support SSE in the supply chain, please drop us a line. Very happy for people to contact us. And then as we move forward with the process, I will be spending a lot of time engaging with companies particularly in East Lothian and Scotland more broadly, where we want to just reach out, and we'll be holding events. And I think it is a challenge to connect always the right people to the right companies and make the conversation really meaningful. Often these events can be quite short, and so I think I just ask people if they're interested in being involved, please persevere. Please do get in touch with us. I'll get you to the right people, or we'll try and get a conversation going. One of our key objectives in the project is to make sure that we support as much investment as possible into Scotland, and the supply chain that already exists becomes part of our supply chain, but also we attract people who want to diversify and get into offshore wind as a sort of stepping stone into other projects that they might be able to support in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Great. And Alex, how's the reaction been from the local community?
Yeah, really, really positive. Really pleased to be working in East Lothian. Now, I have a bit of a sort of it's not really so much of a secret. So I'm a Welshman, and that's certainly not a secret. But I was actually born in Edinburgh, and my first home was in Gullane. And now you may ask, how does that make me a Welshman? But my mother always used to say, a cat born in the biscuit tin is not a biscuit. So I have a connection back to East Lothian, and my passion for the area and for the kind of doing the right thing in that community is very personal. So we've spent a lot of time in those communities, whether that's around Dunbar. Wick was the particular village where our substation we built, and around to North Berwick, Gullane, and places that I'm a bit more familiar with from my childhood. We spend time, I've done it myself, standing out, talking on the street, seeing what people think, and we've also held lots of events and been, giving people opportunity to engage in that way. And the feedback generally is a huge appetite for East Lothian to play its part in the next step of the energy transition. There's Torness Power Station just in East Lothian, and there's been other coal power stations, Musselburgh, etc. And there's a real appetite for East Lothian to be part of green electricity generation, and I feel a real sense of understanding of the challenge of climate change as well in the community. There's a real sense that people see this as an urgent issue and want it to be addressed quickly. Having said that, there is also clearly, and there would always be, caution around the impact that a project like this might have on wildlife, and particularly in East Lothian seabirds. So we have spent a lot of time thinking about how do we mitigate, firstly, any potential impacts with on seabirds, and we've done that through working very hard on reductions and maximum possible reductions of the scale of the site, so that any interactions with seabirds are minimized. But we're also working on a plan to tackle seabird decline, frankly, as what it is around the UK, but particularly in Scotland, in a more strategic way. So as part of our planning application, we are proposing that sand eel fishing zones are closed for further fishing, because some of the key species that we're trying to support, and I think the whole community wants to see thrive, are dependent on sand eels. And honestly speaking, although wind turbines have potential challenges for seabirds, it's the lack of food and prey availability which is the key cause of seabird decline. And actually, my impression is that the community in East Lothian understand these issues very, very well, and they are open to our proposal to help address seabird decline, not through not building a wind farm, but through building a wind farm, but adding in a strategic level of help for seabirds, which is by closing sand eel fisheries in that part of the sea, and much wider. Honestly, we believe it would be worthwhile preventing sand eel fishing in a very wide area around the North Sea, and that we predict by doing so, even if you build a lot more wind farms, including Berwick Bank, you'll see seabird populations really recover quite quickly. So that's our proposal, and I think that balance between addressing the climate emergency, but also having a really positive solution to offer to what is effectively a nature emergency is a balance that people are willing to take on board and go forward with the project on that basis.
Great. And Alex, in the Berwick Bank project so far, what are the major hurdles you've had to cross, and how have you overcome them?
Well, we've I think in my time in the project particularly, we've been trying to think through any potential barriers to consent as being the really primary challenges that we face. So the issue of trying to provide a strategic solution for any potential impacts on seabirds has been really a high area of focus for us. Beyond that, and I think that solution I've talked about, I think is a really good option for us and for the seabird community too. Beyond that, one of the areas of focus is the ground conditions of the site, and that's firstly offshore. So clearly it's very easy to imagine the seabed as a beautiful flat, lovely, easy to work on area, even though it's covered by sea. But in reality, and particularly in the Firth of Forth, there are some very complex geological formations that have been built up. Scotland's geology is what it is. It's a beautiful, on land, you see the really interesting volcanic plugs and the way that the landscape is shaped. And under the sea, that has a kind of parallel. There is a lot of interesting formations there. Now, I won't try and pretend my geological knowledge is of an order that I can give you the full briefing on that. But the geologists that work with us have been really focused on understanding that geology really well, because when we put these huge foundations into the seabed, we have to be sure that they will hold and that they will be solid for the lifetime of the project. So we go out and we do exploration campaigns on vessels which dig boreholes to understand what the sediment and the rock looks like beneath the surface. And so that's been a big focus for us. And we can then bring up a kind of ground map beneath the sea to give us an idea of what we're working with. So that's an area we've done a lot of work on. But also on land, for those who know the East Lothian area, it's not flat either. And so understanding how do we get from landfall to our grid connection point without disturbing or interfering with environmental areas and people's homes and businesses is a really important part of our work. And not only that, negotiating some tricky burns and really difficult features around that part of the world. So they've been really important challenges too. And as I mentioned just now, one of the big challenges outside of the core project work has been just developing the project through the pandemic. For example, we've done the biggest aerial survey campaign that's ever been done in this area, and we had to go through a process of understanding how could we set planes, which are quite small but traditionally two person in a plane, out to survey when you couldn't have people within 2 meters of each other. Now, and these planes are not big enough to have that kind of social distancing. So, we had to come to an arrangement to allow that to go on safely during the pandemic. Because if you miss a month of surveying, you've blown the whole process more or less. You have to have a consistent understanding of where birds are on the site every month for 2 years. So, that's not an easy thing to achieve when no one's allowed to go within 2 meters of each other, let alone, at some points leave your home. So lots of exciting challenges like that. I take my hat off to colleagues in other projects, but also across the industry who've not only been doing development work, but construction work in those conditions. And for the people who run operational sites too, keeping the lights on and the turbines turning in the pandemic has been a huge challenge. But even on development projects, we've had our issues too.
Great. Alex, thanks for that. The offshore renewables industry has got huge value to add, not just decarbonisation and energy security, but all the jobs and investment that you've mentioned. It obviously takes a while to get these projects all the way to first power. But how do we reduce that time? What can we do?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that has been thought about and discussed, everywhere from conversations like this to boardrooms at SSE to number 10, to Butte House. Everyone wants to know, how do we make this quicker? Because we all, I think, recognise, or at least I feel that we all recognise the urgency of the climate emergency. And as you say, the issues that we faced this year with the war in Ukraine and the security of supply questions has really, I think, supercharged that desire to move projects quicker. What we can do, I think, is try to make the consenting process more streamlined and less driven by, I think, a real fascination with trying to predict the future in a perfect way. Because I think where we've probably found ourselves as an industry is having more data, having better understanding of what the impact of a wind farm is, can tie us in knots a little bit around, then trying to model, future projects, understand exactly how movements of birds, marine mammals, whatever it is, are going to change if we put wind turbines in certain locations. I think at some point we have to recognise that there is going to be some uncertainty around that, and we will do our best to mitigate and to work together as we move through the project. But ultimately, that understanding has to be coupled with some uncertainty, unfortunately. And if we as a nation, I think as a consenting kind of, because ultimately consenting, I always remind people, the reason we call it consenting is because it's the public giving consent. It has to be a democratic process. It's a consent given by our nation or our local authority for something to happen. And it needs that consent. We need to cross some sort of threshold of understanding, but it doesn't have to be absolute. And I think where we've got to, in some ways, is to think, to give a consent, we have to have a complete clarity on what's going to happen next. But I think as a nation, where we are with the climate emergency, I think we're willing to give consent to projects that can help address that without us getting to a point of certainty, which I think is unachievable. And what does that mean in practical terms? I think it means perhaps relaxing some of the regulatory restrictions around development of offshore wind in particular, but I guess there are other examples, to allow for projects to go ahead with some of that uncertainty. Now, I think Scotland is potentially in a very good place to take that forward, because the consenting regime has devolved, and therefore there's an opportunity to be innovative and to try and seek new ways forward. But I know that the UK government as well is really progressing on their thinking around how to streamline some of these projects. So I think everyone's working on this, and certainly in my position, we very much welcome solutions, and we're contributing to the discussion as well. But I think it does take a collective will to consider, can we offer our consent as a community and as a nation in a way which is less heavily loaded with certainty about outcomes around certain parts of the project.
Great. And Alex, one of the areas that one of the area of criticism that I often hear from the naysayers of the industry is the problem with wind power is that it can't be stored. Do you think enough's being done to develop and stimulate storage of energy from offshore wind?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'd like to see more being done. Honestly, I think it is an issue which I think could be developed at higher speed. It has not always been seen as the most important technology, but storage, I think, is gaining momentum as a technology at large scale. So what we need with offshore wind is not so much the smaller scale, obviously, storage solutions that we're all familiar with, batteries, lithium ion batteries, those sort of things. It's more the long duration storage. And honestly speaking, UK has had opportunities to go forward with long-term storage with a bit more gusto, and hasn't taken them. And at SSE, we're developing a large-scale hydro storage project called Corrie Glass, which is, a number of those projects would be a really good way to bring something of a solution to this. But the way that project might be financed or supported by government is not clear enough yet, and there's work going on to develop solutions. But offshore wind has had a support mechanism which is well understood now for knocking on the door of, I think, 6 or 7 years, whereas long-term storage hasn't had that same support mechanism understood. And so people who've had good ideas or technology that might have come to market or been developed at scale haven't been able to do that. Not only that, the way that offshore wind connects to the grid it complicates the ability to put long-term storage around the grid connection, because we, as a developer, we have to sell our transmission assets once we've developed and built the project. So the buyer of a transmission asset doesn't necessarily know whether they want storage as part of that transmission solution. And so there is a challenge to make the business model work for a developer like SSE when building an offshore wind farm. Could we, or should we, or is it even regulatory possible to incorporate a storage solution onto our transmission assets? So it does get a bit techie in that sense, but I think the two areas I'd say need more focus is, one is finding a suitable support mechanism for long-term storage, and secondly for offshore wind to find a way to manage that technical issue of putting storage next to offshore wind grid connections.
Okay, great. And it looks like we're going to have a new Prime Minister soon. Alex, if it was you, what would be your first action, energy-related action?
Yeah, I think, well, look, the energy piece has become, a central policy concern for everyone, and I'm sure, from everything I read, the top of the inbox for the new Prime Minister UK will be energy policy, which is a fascinating commentary on where we are as a nation. But it's there's no doubt in my mind that the first priority is going to have to be addressing how all of us, I think, in the UK are going to get through the next period of bill increases. So I can see at the retail end of the energy system, the first focus to be providing support that works for people there. More on the supply side and the generation side, which is probably, I suppose, where we're more thinking. I think that emphasis on speeding up consent is the right area, and I'm pretty confident that there is a strong agenda already set in Westminster particularly, but I know as well at Holyrood, to ensure that process of refining and speeding up consenting continues. But I think the main point, honestly, is that there has to remain a clear focus on decarbonisation and achieving net zero as quickly as possible, and that kind of overarching support for that agenda is the most important thing. That we have to maintain a kind of leadership role in offshore wind, particularly specifically, but also in other technologies, to ensure that the UK can get the most out of all of the investments that might come, not just from offshore wind, but in other technologies too. And if we were to find ourselves in a position where there was a doubt or a concern about whether there was an appetite to really go forward and deliver net zero, I think that would have a really negative effect on investment decisions and the way people are developing technology in the UK. And that goes from big developers trying to build offshore wind farms to the small scale technology companies, the spin-offs, the people who are looking at really interesting solutions, whether that's digital data, whatever it is in the UK, would be thinking, oh, hang on, if that agenda wasn't strongly part of the next government or future governments, there would be a sense of, are we in the right place to take that forward? And that's what we need to avoid. So I think keeping the momentum going, but keeping a very public and determined commitment to net zero and all of the positive investments that will come with that, it's going to be the main thing I'm looking for.
Great. Okay. Well, that's understood. And in terms of the consenting piece, how much of an improvement do you think we can get?
Well, as I say, I mean, the current target in Scotland is 9 months for a consent decision. Now we, because our project is large scale, taken time to get that application ready. I think 9 months to a year is a good target, honestly, for a consenting decision. If we could reduce the burden on the information that has to be provided into that submission, that would shorten the time that we take to get there. So I think some work in that area would be good. In England and Wales, so following the other planning regime, there's an 18-month period for these kind of decisions. I think that could definitely be reduced. So I think Scotland, as I say, has an opportunity to lead on this. But Berwick Bank is a bit of a test case in this context because there hasn't been an offshore wind consent decision for a few years in Scotland. And when they did come through, they did take a bit longer, and they were, well, to be fair, actually, the last one was done within, I think, a year. So I think a year is a good target, and I think we can maintain that, and then push on from there. But I think, the need to get Berwick Bank through the process quickly will set the agenda, and the understanding that people will say, well, actually, the Scottish planning system is one that can move efficiently, or in the alternative, if it doesn't move quickly, then that might send a message to suggest that projects might take longer to get through the process, which wouldn't be a good thing.
Great. Alex, this is the fourth of the podcast interviews that we've done. And each time we ask the audience to suggest some questions. And I'm delighted to say the first time we've got a question. So the question's this. Offshore wind relies on the climate to generate electricity, and it's often said to be important in the climate change battle. In conceiving and delivering a major offshore wind project such as yours, is the effect of a change in climate or a change in wind resource factored in from the start?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is yes, with some caveats in that we don't know yet quite how that wind resource is changing. I think what we can do is try and expect a change and build with the technology that is best suited to manage those changes. So, for example, we know quite a lot about the wind speed and direction that we've experienced since we've been monitoring in the Firth of Forth. And, the data on that is strong. Obviously, we've been working there for 10 years and we have a good understanding. But we do know that climate change is creating more violent storms, more challenging kind of intense periods of wind, and then potentially periods without wind. And so we need to make sure that the manufacturers that we're working with are designing blades and turbines to take advantage of the wind when it's at its peaks, but also to be able to harness even the meagerest wind resource when it perhaps drops. So we are always looking to sort of predict and to understand weather patterns and wind data better. And honestly speaking, that's partly because we are looking to get the most out of our machines. So when we design the layout, when we look at how we space the turbines, we're looking very closely at wake effects and what are changes in the potential layouts going to do to yields overall. So I mean, and trying to think through what our project looks like in whether it's 2050, 2055. Is important to us because we want to know that we'll be getting the most out of our machines, in that period too. So no, I think it's a really good question, honestly, and we are definitely working hard to try and understand it as well as we can.
Great, and Alex, we've said that you're the man that's leading a £9 billion project to deliver 307 Eiffel Towers size structures onto the seabed of the east coast of Scotland. It's an incredible project. I'd like to understand how you came to lead such an impressive project. Can you take us through your career to date?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a bit of a flavour for it. I mean, it's my background actually is working in legal, and so I trained as a lawyer originally and was very passionate about the environment. And I think, sometimes those two things, are difficult to bring together. But actually, my feeling was that with legal skills, you can get much more into the detail of, how you address climate issues and, what are the regulatory challenges that you might try and overcome. And I was very passionate about that. I spent quite a lot of my time on climate marches and doing lots of advocacy work, but equally doing legal work in the background. What should I say? The legal work was in the foreground, and maybe the protests were in the background. I don't know which way around it was. And in the end, although I worked for a law firm originally, I was determined to go and get closer to to the action. And I took up a job in another utility, actually working on wind projects. And through that process, it's an interesting challenge though, because all of the big utilities historically were also some of the biggest polluters. And so the choice I made was very much that it's better to be in a utility that's looking to change and to develop projects and to do the right thing than to be outside shouting about it and saying how come you're not doing any better. So working within a utility to try and make sure their wind projects were given the prominence they deserved, even through some years where offshore and onshore wind weren't seen as being the great investment opportunities they are now. And over time, I moved out of the legal function into a more commercial role and into a project. And I have to say it's been a great step for me, because I love being an advisor, someone who is able to assist with projects and to take them forward and to solve problems in that way. But being part of the team, being part of the real engine of where the activity is happening, was something I really, really enjoyed and continue to enjoy. And when the opportunity came up to work with SSE on Berwick Bank, as I say, I had that affinity and affection for the area, for East Lothian, and the project is of a scale which, to me, felt was significant and a step change for not just Scotland but for the UK in terms of delivery on decarbonisation. That I was very, very excited to try and take up the role of leading the team. But that's the point, is that this kind of project is is never about one person. Don't care whether it's a project director, whether it's the person who's doing the turbine selections or the engineering or the consenting work. It's a massive team effort. I'm lucky enough to lead the team, and that means I get to do some of the nice things like have chats like this. But reality is the work that goes on in a team like mine. We're talking about there's over 50 people working on this project now, and it's a great privilege to be able to lead the team and be able to take the project forward. So it's I think for anyone who's thinking about working in renewables, I think the main important lesson is there are lots of routes. I didn't start out as a kind of offshore wind person originally. I studied in a slightly different area and then developed my career, and then the opportunity came along, which I've been really grateful for. So no matter what line of work you're in, there's always, I think, as this industry grows, opportunities to move into exciting roles on projects, from whichever background you come. But the thing you have to bring to make it work is your passion. The thing that makes a difference to me, I think, and hopefully one of the things that people like about working with me, is that I'm very passionate about this project. I'm very passionate about what we're trying to do for the for the climate change agenda, for decarbonisation. And if you're passionate about those things, you'll achieve great things in whatever area you go into.
Great. That's a tremendous message. Alex, how do you define success for Berwick Bank?
Well, we've got some really clear objectives in terms of delivering the project. So, we obviously want to get through the consent process and into construction and deliver the full 4.1 gigawatts by 2030. Now, that would be a success in the kind of practical sense. But I think there's more that I think about when I think about a success for our project. And that, two things in particular I think are important. One is that we achieve really strong investment into Scotland through the supply chain as a result of this project. So I want to see us maximising those opportunities we've talked about for tier one and all suppliers to come and invest in Scotland or to grow their businesses in Scotland, to create that economic opportunity. And something we haven't talked about much, but is an important passion of mine, is that we make the project feel and look as more diverse and more like the community that we work in and we serve. There's the kind of sense that offshore wind has an opportunity to be a bit different to some of the historic engineering projects over the years that have been very, very straight sort of male, white kind of environments for people. And one thing that we talk about a lot in my project and SSE generally is how do we diversify that workforce, make sure that our projects are bringing up all the best talents that we have in our communities. And so, if we get to the end of this project and we look like a team of people who would have built an oil rig, 30, 40 years ago, that wouldn't be a success in my view. What I wanted to see is when we get to that point that we have a team of people that look a bit different to that and that have brought different skills and qualities to the project along the way. So that's an important thing that we need to work on. And honestly speaking, we have still got some work to do on that for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. And how do you define success for yourself, Alex?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I am very passionate about delivering this project. So I take a lot of personal responsibility for how we do, and if we do well, I'll share that with the team, and if it doesn't go so well, I'm sure I'll feel that very personally. So it's one of those difficult things. But I think I'm learning a lot along this journey. As I say, I've come from a slightly different background, and so for me to be able to grow and learn along the way, about a lot of different disciplines that I'm not an expert in is a real challenge for me. So how that looks in specifics, I think look at being able to spot issues and manage people better is something I'm always working on. And it comes back to something I was just saying in a way, but if I can see a team around me of people who I've helped develop over a few years of working on this project, and I have had this experience in the past, and it's the most satisfying experience I think anyone can have in any profession, is when you see people with a bit of talent and you give them a chance to do something and grow and get better and develop, and they do something great, and you see that, and it's just a magical thing. So, for me, a success would be to see a team around me where people have grown and become better at delivering offshore wind farms in whatever particular discipline they're in, and have taken from the experience of working on Berwick Bank and then gone on to do great things. I mean, I'm fully expecting part of my teams to be going off being project directors for great projects all over the world in a few years' time. There's some really talented people in the team. So, if I can see that, that would be a job well done from my point of view.
Great. Well, look, Alex, that brings us to the end of our interview today. Thank you so much for joining us. I think everybody will agree, it's been really interesting to speak with you and to find out more about the project. And I for one, will be following it closely as it hopefully speedily comes towards first power.
Thanks very much.
Great. So, Alex Meredith, project director at Berwick Bank offshore wind farm. Thank you for joining us today. And as always, feedback on today's podcast, very, very welcome, and suggestions for who to feature in future, and any questions that you would like asked would be more than welcome. Feel free to get in touch through LinkedIn or by email. My email address, Murray, Moray, @annetconsulting.com. And I hope to see you in the next episode when we feature more leaders, innovators, and directors from throughout the offshore wind industry. Thank you very much.